Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to announce the lecture by Professor Fabio Hernandez Palacio, a visiting professor in the chair of housing environment. He is an associate professor in University of Stavanger, Norway, and his area of expertise is focused around understanding the nature of high-quality urban environments, the urban form, and its influence on the societies. He has worked as a consultant for private and public entities in Colombia and the Netherlands in areas related to the city and regional planning, transport, accessibility, urban and architectural design. With his students, he also engages in the urban transformation debates in Norway through workshops and collaborative projects with local municipalities. He has also published numerous research papers on urban morphology, density, and the impact of urban form on accessibility. And the lecture is entitled, Can Urban Form Influence Sustainability? 10 Questions on Urban Densification as a Planning Strategy. Please, Fabio, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very kind presentation. I am very pleased to be here today with you. I would like to tell this story about urban form and sustainability. And it is based on my work in Norway. I moved to Norway in 2013 to do a PhD, and it was not my goal to be living there. I was planning to come back to my country, but it happens that I stayed there. But anyway, that is interesting. When I came to Norway, I had a subject to write a PhD about densification as a planning strategy to achieve sustainability. And then I came to Norway, and of course I was living in Colombia in a large city, 3 or 4 million, very compact. And then I arrived to Norway, and it was small cities, very sprawl. And of course, we all know that Norway is a very prosperous society, mostly based, an economy heavily based on oil. So that's why I made this kind of cartoon of the sustainable Norwegian city. It's based on oil, but anyways, they have been trying very hard in improving the situation there. And something that I discovered recently is when I arrived there 13 years ago, I remember that Norway was the country in Europe with the highest car tenancy. It was around 650 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. But some weeks ago, I discovered that now this place has been taken by Poland. Poland now has like more than 750 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. So then I thought that bringing this story would be something very interesting for Poland as well. The cases that I am presenting here are of course based on Norway, but I have the feeling that Poland is somehow going the same path, or have been going the same path in the last probably 30 years. Well, as you know as well, Norway is trying to improve at least the green aspect of a car-based transport just by replacing them by Teslas. But well, still cars in a way are very problematic for cities. So I want to address these 10 points. Of course, for architects thinking in the large scale, the scale of the cities, is sometimes that some architects just work in the architectural scale and they do not reflect on the larger scale and the challenges that the urban form creates for societies. But I mean, other architects like myself, I moved gradually from architecture to urbanism. And well, urban form, of course, is something that I discovered that is very much influential and is very much crucial for the quality of life and for the sustainability of societies. And one of the most well-established approaches to address sustainable city is this policy called urban densification. Then I would like to start by defining what is urban densification, then why urban densification, what can be the negative effects of urban densification, how do we arrive to sprawl urban regions, what are the costs of sprawl of these very spread cities, what are the common approaches to implementing densification strategies, what are the main barriers to effective densification strategy, how dense built environments can contribute to urban quality, and of course, as I mentioned, the situation that I'm mentioning here is the Norwegian situation, so I would like to know how, or I would like to describe how the situation is in Norway and how the situation is in Stavanger, the city I'm living in. And I hope that probably some of those challenges that they have are somehow connected to Polish cities, to Krakow. I think they are in some way. And well, I would like to close that probably by a small conversation on how those Polish cities are planning to face sustainability challenges. So the first, what is urban densification? Well, here we have an Asian city with a extremely high, I think it is Hong Kong, is extremely high density. But anyway, by densification, we mean it's a process of making cities more compact, so adding functions, adding infrastructures, concentrating them in a specific area, so we can have the benefits of this agglomeration. We can provide services more effectively, we can provide especially public transport. Something is happening with this thing. And we can also decrease the consumption of energy for everyday transport, but also as density or densification, especially houses are smaller, so houses also use less energy for heating or for cooling. So in a way, density has been a strategy to make cities more resource effective. Here, this is a question that I always put to my students. Of course, they are people who is starting in urban design, and they do not understand very well the concept of density. And then the question is, of course, which of those urban layouts is the densest? And of course, you know the answer with this because you are familiar. But people tend to relate high density with high rise, which is not the case. And then it creates many problems and many miscommunications and many challenges for city planners. But the question here is that all of those three layouts, they have exactly the same density. And then I also want to call the attention on the difference between the word densification, which is the process of making cities more dense, and the term density, which is a measurement. So like here, there are many measurements of density. One very common is people per area or dwellings per hectare or whatever area we have. And of course, we have concentrating activities and infrastructures can be achieved in two ways. The first is by building more in the same area, and the second is by concentrating more people on the same land surface. Densification occurs more frequently by combining both larger built surfaces to support greater concentration of people and activities. But I mean, how to understand that? We have concentration of people, but also we have concentration of built stocks. A very common exercise, if you go back, for instance, in history in Krakow, probably you will discover that 200 or 300 years ago, the amount of people living in the old town of Krakow was probably 2 or 3 times larger than today, because families were larger, they used to live more crowded, but how now people have more spacious apartments and so on. So the density, the build density is the same, but the amount of people living in those areas is less. So there is those double aspects of density. So here I bring two examples also because people misinterpret both ideas of the concentration of build stock and the concentration of people. And it's, for instance, the population in this neighborhood in Mumbai, Kamatipura, is one of the densest areas in India, and it concentrates around 1,200 people per inhabitants per hectare. And people just enjoy about 10 square meters per person, so a roof area by people. But we have, in the other side, we have a very luxurious apartments in Manhattan with, of course, also very high density, but people enjoy their 50 square meters of built area per person. And the density is, of course, about the half, 580 inhabitants per hectare. So in general, I mean, for me, it is very important that architects and urban designers can understand very well that density can be accommodated in many different ways. And you can achieve density both in high-rise, but also in low-rise examples, as the examples I have here in this picture. In the one side is Manhattan, in the other, in the middle is in Rome, and towards the other side is Cairo, and both are very dense built environments with very different urban forms. One of the concerns as well is that density is a factor that can impact quality of life, and indeed, density can be problematic, especially very high densities. However, we know, urban designers, we defend the idea that it is possible to accommodate quite high densities with good quality. So it is a question of design. And here we have, for example, this very interesting example in the center of Amsterdam, the neighborhood called The Pipe. And it's an area about 140 dwellings per hectare. And still is an area that is very much appreciated by Dutch people, very pricey, very high quality standards. And I know you are very familiar with that areas with high density and high quality standards, especially in traditional Polish cities. So we have also the question of how much density is good. Is there a threshold in which we can say there is a good density and beyond that is problematic, or below that is too little? And of course, it is that, I mean, but it's not really a clear it's not a clear standard. It's kind of a threshold, and of course, it's very much cultural as well. So the question of optimal urban densities appears to be fundamental to enable the positive effects of densification as the sustainability multiplier and the social acceptability of denser urban areas. I think the main constraint is how much density a society can accept. And we know that, for instance, Asian cities can accept much higher densities than European or American cities, for example. So now we go to the second one, why urban densification? Well, the question about urban densification actually started in the late 1980s with this study. This is a study by Newman and Kenworthy in 1989. Those are some Australian transport planners. And this became very famous because they made a global comparison measuring the amount of gasoline or fuel per capita and compared that with urban density. And of course, they found that cities, very high density cities like Hong Kong, were very much efficient in the use of fuel. They don't need much fuel because people can walk everywhere, or they can use the metro. But in the other extreme is Houston in Texas, where people need to use the car to go everywhere because the city is very, very sprawl. So then from this study, it starts like a very powerful movement to plan for more compact cities. And probably you are familiar with a lot of literature and studies, especially in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, about the compact city. And of course, it has been an issue not only in Norway, also in the Nordics, in Europe and beyond. So how to reduce the CO2 emissions, how compact cities and more compact buildings also require less energy for cooling and heating because they have less exposed surfaces. Also dwellings also tend to be smaller, and this means lower energy consumption instead easy to provide by renewable sources. And also the other benefit from densification is avoiding the expansion of urban development on agricultural lands. That is very important, especially in countries like Norway, in which only the 2% of the land surface is suitable for agriculture. And of course, there are many economic reasons to think that density is good. Dense urban environments provide the conditions to reduce and improve the supply chain coordination, leading to a better logistic distribution of goods and services. So we can provide services like post, like delivering food to supermarkets, to grocery shops, collecting trash, etc., in a more effective way. Concentrating the uses leads to optimization of the use of infrastructure such as electricity grids, water pipes, and street networks. Thus, operating services is cheaper. That was one of the main concerns in Norway, because as municipalities and cities were growing very extensively, municipalities discovered that they have to invest more in maintaining roads, in maintaining pipes, in collecting trash, and so on. And they couldn't increase taxes to cover those services. So that's a very common problem, that in those low density areas, the government somehow has to subsidize many services. So it is costly for the governments, for local governments, to operate those very sprawl, low density built environments. Densification is further considered a practical approach to reconcile tensions between the economic and the environmental dimension of sustainability. So in a way, we can say that densification is some type of win-win situation, because it is good for also for municipalities, for people living there, because they could access services more effectively, more cheaper by foot, by cycle. They don't require to have a car. It's also very good for urban developers, because they, in theory, they can sell more units in the same plot of land. But still, we have many challenges to achieve good densification. Some social reasons for densification and for density are: compact cities contribute to a vibrant public realm. Some people find that, of course, problematic because they find the areas noisy sometimes. But also concentrating people and activities enhance the possibilities to access diverse and affordable services within shorter distances. So probably you are familiar with the concept of the 15-minute cities. That's only possible to do in compact areas. Denser built environments improve creativity and innovation by attracting human talent to regions where they can access existing urban life atmosphere. That's probably you are familiar with the work of an academic urbanist called Richard Florida, who writes about the creative class city, and he maintains that compact urban environments in the United States, they attract younger people, more talent, because these people enjoy more the urban life, and thus it is possible to enhance the creativity of cities with these type of environments. So the question, if this is so good, why are there so many sprawled cities? So why are we building the cities in the way we are doing that? So I will try to answer that by going to my next point. What can be the negative effects of over-densification? So this is one part of the story. And of course, having too much high densities can be also problematic. There are some environmental reasons why people don't like to live in very dense urban environments. Denser built environments can generate higher traffic congestion, air and noise pollution concentrations in a given area. Also, the concentration of people reduces the surface of green area per person. And compactly developed areas increase soil impermeability, favoring the conditions for floodings. Those are just 3 examples from an environmental perspective. There are also social reasons why people is skeptic of very compact urban areas. High densities can be unpopular, especially among families with children and in affluent societies. So people have the idea that children have a better quality of life if they have the possibility of living in a big house with a green area around, despite parents have to transport them and move them from A to B, and children don't have the freedom to move outside the house without the parents escorting them wherever they want to go. Also, social conflicts are more frequent in crowded urban areas. Noise and forced proximity with relatives and strangers are a source of discomfort and stress that can lead to violence. And also, crowded areas enable the spread of diseases. That's something that we learned very well during the COVID crisis. So we were asked to keep a distance and so on. And this is not the first time that it happens. However, we still like density because it has also many other benefits, as I described earlier. And some economic reasons for against density. So dense urban environments can increase traffic congestion, leading to a decline in overall productivity in some cities. Or that's at least some people claim that. Also, the pollution and congestion can make urban areas less attractive, specifically in for high quality human talent. And also, dense urban area cannot grow and can lead to high property prices if they cannot expand. So people with less means, they cannot afford to live in those central areas, and can be negative for the economy. So another reason why we are building sprawled cities is under the answer of this question: how do we arrive to sprawled urban regions? And you all know that the traditional city, especially in Europe or elsewhere, was a very compact one, because it was basically because of technological reasons. First was military reasons, so cities need to be walled, and being protected inside walls was a very desirable thing because wars and conflicts were very common. And also, it was not possible to move very far. I mean, a person can walk probably around 5 kilometers per hour. And if we want to commute every day to the things in a few minutes, half an hour, so it means that cities cannot be very sprawled. And also, we did have technologies to transport people and move things from very far away. So cities need to be compact and kind of in a network of small settlements to control agricultural land. So for economic reasons, we developed this type of traditional pattern. And for instance, this is a very interesting picture of New York in 1903, when all things in cities were moved by animals or by walking. And it was also an image in New York some 10 years later, so full of cars and also full of people, as you see in the sidewalks. And here we have this other image of Houston in 1977. And then my question is, now spot a human. So those changes happen very fast, and cars really are probably the biggest change in urban space. And of course, I mean, you are very familiar, the professors here are very familiar with the early ideas about the modern city, but probably some of the students are not. But as early as in 1920s, architects like Frank Lloyd Wright in the US began to see his architectural work as an integral part of a larger concept that he called the broadacre city. So he has the vision that in this new democratic and prosperous society, people could have the advantage of the modern technology, meaning cars, and as a means of communication to decentralize the city. So it was possible to live in this kind of rural environment, but still enjoying the benefits of an urban environment. So by cars, he envisioned that it was possible to live in a large plot of land with a large house, but it was possible to access a lot of land and a lot of services within a short time of commuting, which is indeed is true. Then, of course, people realize, especially planners in the periphery of cities, they realized very early that cars were very problematic, especially for children or for elderly people, because it was accidents were very common. So they came with this brilliant idea of making a design of an urban area in which cars can be separated from people. So the streets that used to be the space for all type of mobility, cars, animals, people, they became only the realm of cars. And in this layout, cars access from the back of the houses, and the front of the houses is entered from the pedestrian paths in green areas. And this kind of damage or create a totally new approach to the urban block. And we see this type of urban design as a very modern, but this almost, as you see, almost 100 years old. The other part of this phenomenon, how we arrive to these prolet cities, is the car industry declared a war on public transport worldwide. And that's something that seems to be kind of this, how do you call that, those sinister theories, conspiration theories, but indeed it happened. So in this presentation, I have a link to this documentary that is called Taken for a Ride, and it's the story of the big car industries in the United States, and that decide to make a big fund of money to buy the operators of public transport in many large American cities, like in Los Angeles and somewhere else. So they bought all the tram systems, the railway systems, and they just let them rotten to sell buses and to sell cars. And they did that in many other places around the world by different means. So they helped to dismantle the collective transport to be able to sell cars. And it was proven, and they were to trial, and they had to pay some fine and so on, and things, of course, continue from there, but the impact that it has in cities was tremendous. So we arrived to this type of landscape, which is the landscape or that we see in the periphery of many cities, many affluent cities, like is the case now in Poland. And today we have that cities are not even defining the border of a city is very problematic, because of course cities are based on transport. So, and then we come to this definition of the functional urban region, which has been adopted by the European Union and the OECD. And they define an urban functional region as an agglomeration in which you are able to commute, so mean to travel every morning within 1 hour. So, and you probably understand that going 1 hour by car from here, from Krakow, you can reach many other small towns. And in a way, those towns, they are part of the same urban phenomenon. And that creates many other challenges because many times there are many different municipalities because municipalities, they come from older times. Well, those communities were very local and they have concentrated problems. But now those problems of transport, providing services, they are regional problems. And this is a new problem, a contemporary problem for planning, that we do not have the institutions to properly plan those cities. And probably you experience that problem or that situation very often here in Krakow as well, that one municipality, neighborhood municipality has different plans that doesn't match to the next municipality, and there is not dialogue, there is no consultation among them, and that creates many problems, especially for the provision of transport or the provision of some larger infrastructure, regional infrastructure, and so on. And here we have this very interesting graphic showing how density in cities has been declining globally and how it is different in developing countries, in other developed countries, and the so-called land-rich developed countries. I would say that Poland is probably in the third group, land-rich developed countries. Poland is a large country with relatively small population for the area. So you are not in the situation, let's say, of the Netherlands, for example, which is a very tiny country in which they have to be very careful in how they dispose land uses. Here you have the luxury of having a lot of land and probably also land of high agricultural quality. So cities can easily sprawl over the agricultural barrier without creating much problems for the economy of the country. And this is how many urban agglomeration looks today. And they are, they are a single phenomenon, but they are split in many different areas. So governing this type of agglomeration is very problematic. Well, this is the case of functional urban regions in the Nordic countries. So there are many of them. In Norway, particularly, in the Nordic countries, almost 55% of the population lives in the 30 largest urban functional areas, despite probably you have been there in the Nordics, with the exception of Copenhagen and Stockholm. All the other cities are quite small. Oslo is around 600,000, so probably Oslo, which is the capital of Norway, is around the size of Krakow. And imagine Krakow is bigger than Oslo, and many are just agglomeration of around 200,000, 300,000 inhabitants, but very spread. So we arrive to sprawled cities by a combination of policies, but especially because we decided that cities were going to function around cars. And what are the costs of those sprawled cities? Here, I came to this graphic. Is an analysis made for Canadian cities. And they really made an estimation. Especially in North America, they have been doing a lot of studies. How much does it cost, both for a family, for municipalities, and for the society as a whole, to live in this type of environments? And there are many costs, of course. So there are direct costs and indirect costs. And they estimate, for instance, that the indirect cost of the automobile use in Canada are 27 billion per year. Government, they have to invest 13 1.5 billion per year just maintaining infrastructure for cars. You already know, because probably many of you have cars, you know how much they cost per month. And if your family live in one of those houses, probably you are not good with only one car. Probably you need 2 cars if both parents work. So how much does it cost for a family to own or to afford this type of lifestyle? Also the cost of providing services and as I mentioned earlier. So all those costs are very high for families and for societies and for the environment. So here they made some kind of estimation that walking costs you $1 if you have to walk, just 1 cent. Probably you just use a little bit of shoes. If you have to bike per kilometer, you just need 8 cents. If you have to pay public transport, probably $1.50 will be enough to buy a ticket. But if you have to drive, you have to invest a lot. Probably for every dollar that you invest, the society has to pay $9.20 because they have to maintain roads, they have to take care of people who get affected by the pollution and get sick, and etc. So there are a lot of hidden costs in this lifestyle. So those are roughly the figures that they came to show that it is almost 3 times higher to live in a large house in the periphery than in an apartment in the center of the city per family. And the cost, of course, is about how much the government needs to invest in maintaining infrastructure, providing security, fire safety, transport, providing libraries and people accessing those libraries, transporting children to schools every day, etc. Things that you could do more effectively in more compact areas. So what are the common approaches to implement densification strategies? Well, we have basically 3 ways, I would say, to achieve more compact urban areas. The first is by replacing, and it is happening, of course, in many post-industrial cities when you have old port areas, old industrial areas that are not anymore in use. They can be, or buildings that are derelict, they can be replaced by new developments and become denser areas. In some other places, particularly in developing countries, subdividing larger properties is a very common way of doing that, but also happening in some other areas. Let's say here, large houses or large buildings in central areas can be subdivided in small apartments, and in that way you can increase density. And the other thing is by adding, and of course you have very radical way of adding built area like this one in Rotterdam is the Unilever headquarters, in which they just up this box over the existing buildings. The Dutch are allowed to make quite crazy things when it comes to architecture. But the most common one is by adding layers. That is very common, especially in developing countries, like this image in Cairo. Probably you have here the concept of transport-oriented development. So where to add density? And many cities have been implementing this approach that is called transport-oriented development. The first city to do that before it had this name was the city of Curitiba in Brazil, which is the city here in this image. That city had a very interesting approach because they had an architect as a mayor in the 70s. I have the privilege of attending a conference by him when I was a student in my home city in Medellin. I was very impressed all the very common sense strategies that he implemented in Curitiba. His name is Jaume Lerner. And well, they didn't have the means to develop a metro line because it was a small city. They didn't have it cost a lot. But what they did is that they implemented a rapid bus corridor with stations like the one you see here in the corner. So the bus operates like a metro, and they start densifying around those buses. And since the city was growing, they managed to achieve this type of development, and they encouraged densification in the blocks around that bus with all both housing and offices. And in that way, they could manage that many people could achieve going to everyday needs by public transport. And later on, this inspired many other developments. I mean, probably you are familiar with this concept in many other places. Policies to increase density around railroads and bus stops, etc., in many other places. And this idea of implementing this rapid bus approach has been proved in many different areas with different degrees of success. So what are the main barriers to achieve effective densification strategies? Well, I would say that the main barrier is that we already have large parts of our cities built in this way. So, and changing this type of pattern will be very problematic. I mean, imagine you are a family that already bought your house there, you invest in a mortgage for probably 20, 30 years, you are going to live all your life there. So changing that thing will take decades if it can be changed. So the main problem is that we already built our cities in this way. And this is the first is an economic problem. The second one is regulatory. So as I mentioned, since those cities sprawl beyond municipal boundaries, having this coordination between municipalities is very problematic. And it is very problematic because we have a system in which municipalities compete by taxing land property. In very few exceptions, land property are collected nationally. And I would say, I mean, that's the case in the Netherlands. And I managed to read a paper some time ago comparing two countries, Belgium and the Netherlands, which are very similar development, very similar culture, and they have very different cultural patterns. And the theory or the hypothesis those authors had is that in Belgium, municipalities charge land property. So municipalities, when they charge land property, they just encourage and they give a lot of freedom to developers to do whatever they want to do because they just want to increase the tax collection for the municipality. But in the Netherlands, on the other hand, tax collections are centralized, so the municipalities don't have any incentive to increase or to provide more area for developers. So they are very careful in doing that. And the other one is social. Somehow, despite we know that living in this way is more expensive, people associate this type of living with some type of prestige. So having cars, having a large house is an image that people want to project to society, that they are prospering despite probably many of them may have challenges to meet the expenses every month. The other problem, of course, is that I mentioned house owners see their homes as an asset. So they, and it's a very common problem. I don't know what is the situation here in Poland, but it's a very common problem, especially in the United States, in Britain, that people, we have this phenomenon that in English is called NIMBYs, not in my backyard. So people opposing development. And the reason, of course, some people say, okay, well, because new developments are probably very ugly. But also the reason is because people know that if they allow more development, more cars are going to pass nearby, and also the price of the properties will decline. So some type of those land prices are kept artificially high by just squeezing the offer of new houses. The other problem that we have is this type of brownfield redevelopment. So the redevelopment of industrial areas is very costly, is very complicated for a developer. If you offer the chance to a developer to choose where to build, if in an old industrial area that probably has several owners, or in a farm in the periphery that probably just one piece of land, he for sure will choose to develop in the greenfield, because it's a straightforward business. He buy the piece of land, sell 150 houses and finish. But in a brownfield development, probably he has to negotiate with several owners, probably the soil is polluted, it's a lot of problems connected to that. And we don't have, in many cases, we don't have the planning instruments to help those developments to happen faster. And also they need to readapt the street layouts and so on. So it happens that building in those industrial areas can be very costly. The other reason can be regulatory. Building codes tend to discourage subdivisions and additions to existing dwellings for many reasons and in many different ways. So we may have building codes that are not really encouraging densification. And some building codes require minimum standards such as parking places per unit or minimum dwelling sizes. Among the social challenges are, in many contexts, high density has a negative connotation and indeed can be very poor quality. The other negative part or associated is when we manage to achieve good densification, usually those areas, especially when there is kind of, imaginary, I think it's something happening probably here in Krakow, that probably some of the areas in the center of Krakow, they have been somehow ruined down, but suddenly as is a successful area for tourists, or for businesses, or for hipster people, young people with good economy. So they manage to build and to buy in, and they start to displace local population, and this is the phenomenon called gentrification. So this is another problem associated with those policies when this is kind of successful in a way. So the eighth question is how denser built environments can contribute to urban quality. Well, the first thing that we need to do is, of course, to define what is urban quality. And let us refer to urban quality as a set of characteristics that make a place comfortable and desirable for living. So it means that houses have a good standard of living in aspects as essential as the area per person, so you are not very crowded. They have good access to natural light and ventilation and safe building materials. And the neighborhood enjoys good access to urban services, grocery shops, schools, and other communal facilities. And you also can enjoy from various green areas and public spaces that are accessible within walkable distances, and the pollution level, including noise, are low, especially at night. And with good design, it is possible to achieve those things, even in high density environments. Urban quality is a complex concept involving several dimensions and numerous aspects. Some are, of course, objective. So objective, I mean that can be measured. They depend on easily measurable physical conditions such as spaciousness, access to services of building qualities. Some others are subjective, and it depends on aspects such as perception and prestige. And let us dive into two simplified categories to explore some of those qualities. Well, in those conditions, of course, they have to do with access to natural light, adequate ventilation, good standards to guarantee comfort for each space. And here, density and typologies of building can be a determinant factor. And we have, of course, we can have very poor high quality density, but we can have also good standards of high quality conditions in high densities, as an early example I show about Manhattan, or the example in Mumbai in India. So it is a question of design. So the size and proportion of each room should be large enough to accommodate adequate furniture and range of potential users. So if we want to achieve high quality density, we need to avoid designing very small units that even cannot fit the proper furniture that we need for everyday life. And also we need to take care of high quality outdoor conditions, especially to provide good accessibility and the provision of services in the vicinity of the developments. So it means combining different functions in different buildings so that people can have the possibility to access the services they need in the proximity where they live. And here we have two examples. The other condition, of course, of this outer condition is the human scale. And we have here two cases. We have Paris and Brasilia, and in a way they are similar densities, but the conditions of this open space is radically different. So of course, you go to whatever party in Paris and you always see people because space is scarce. And people tend to use those open spaces more effectively. They can be also green, and still it is possible to combine high density or relatively high density. I mean, for me, probably the most interesting case, probably some of you have been in Berlin, which have those large blocks with green hearts and quite high density and still a lot of greenery, and offers those wonderful conditions of multifunctional buildings with active ground floors, multi-story apartments, offices, and highly active public realm. Well, this is very quick. How is the situation in Norway? Just for you to have a general idea. And as I mentioned, those densification strategies in Norway have been happening since the 1987. And as I mentioned as well, they started because municipalities became aware that providing services to these very low density environments were very costly for them. And we also have the situation that in Norway, 82% of the population live already in urban settlements. And those settlements, of course, they have very degrees of densities and compactness. Here we have the graphic of the larger agglomerations in Norway, and of course they have historic cores that are quite compact, not very compact, but quite compact, and very large sprawl cities with agricultural land in between and very low densities in many areas. So those are the areas that you can cover in a car within 1 hour of traveling. So they, of course, include several municipalities. And this is how the density has been increasing. Of course, it is, I mean, when you start from a very low base and the government increase or create the condition for increasing densification and attach benefits for municipalities to achieve that, gradually they have been achieving to increase the density of municipalities, those urban areas. But as I mentioned, in Norway as well, land taxes are locally collected, and that creates incentives for municipality to compete. So then municipalities have this dilemma. I mean, if you are a politician that are just 4 years and you have to attract investments in your municipality, you probably want to liberalize the permissions for developers. And you know that if the municipality next door, the next municipality has more flexible benefits, then the developer will go there, and then this is the next municipality who is going to attract the new population. So it is kind of a perverse system that is happening there. So here is how is the density of the city I live in comparison with some of the examples I have presented. So we have central Mumbai with 1,500 people per hectare, central New York with almost 600 people per hectare, and Stavanger in the center with around 100 inhabitants per hectare. So this is the historic development of Stavanger. By the way, I invite you to, we have a very interesting program there in city and regional planning. I will be very pleased to have some of you there as Erasmus students or as our master students eventually. So the city was originally developed around the fisher industry. So it was very prosperous, packing fish in cans and selling them to Northern Europe and to the world around. And it was the business also building ships until the mid-20th century, and it was relatively a compact city. So this is the historic landscape there. That is called Trehusbyen, which means the city of wood. Most of those buildings, they are still in wood, and they are a protected area. So this is the landscape of that protected area that I think is a very interesting landscape. The density here is around 40 to 50 dwellings per hectare. Still, it's possible to provide a good public transport there, but this is the old part. Then in the 70s, they discovered oil. And then is when things start to change radically. Because with oil, it came an economic boom. And one of the, Stavanger became the oil capital because one of those big fields was just in front of the coast of Stavanger. So Stavanger became the headquarters of the oil industry in Norway. And then suddenly the city started, of course, it was in the 70s when we have all this modernization strategy, all the enthusiasm by cars and modernistic buildings and so on. So they start adding gradually large buildings and building roads. And the city expand, and you see here in this island, it's difficult for me to show here, but somewhere here, the old part is over there, and the periphery is all of this, and you can see the difference in densities there. So the city grow lower and lower densities. But recently, they have introduced urban tolls. So every time that you have to use your car, you want to enter the center of those 4 or 5 municipalities, you have to pay. You have to pay like, how much is that? I think it's like around 10 zlotys. So every time your plate appears in the camera, you have to pay. So people, this is a way of incentivizing densification because people don't want to pay much. So it's an additional cost on living. So this gradually is helping city to become denser. Also, they introduced this 4 zoning area in which they prioritize development in the zone E, so meaning in the center area, and in some other corridors close to the bus, rapid bus corridor, and then the area C and D are the less privileged areas for developing permissions. And they have been, I mean, they came with this crazy idea of developing this bus corridor between the center of Stavanger, which is there in the north part, and another center here, which is more in the south, which another city. There are like two larger cities there. Stavanger is around 150,000 inhabitants, and the other city is called Sandnes, is probably around 100,000. So, and they develop, I mean, all is urbanized, and they develop this bus corridor connecting them. Is the line that you see in the perimeter, and they are privileging the development around that area, so that they are expecting that the future urban development happen in that corridor. So they expect that 80% of the dwellings can be built in this central area, and some other 20% can be in other corridor towards the west. But I mean, they have many challenges, and of course, you are not familiar with that, but it was an oil crisis like 10 years ago, and many people, they have to put in the street many workers and so on, and many immigrants, especially people working in the oil industry, many of them are foreigners, and then land prices went down very quick, and even some years, 2015, 2016, 2017, the city, instead of growing, they lose population. They lose 200, 700, 600 people. Still now the city is growing a little bit, but very flat. So the question of also, you need to densify cities, you need to have growing, and you most likely need to attract new people, or you need to demolish houses, or something that has happened in some areas. I know that has happened in some areas in Germany, like in Leipzig. They have a tremendous degrowth phenomenon. They managed to accommodate people from the periphery to the center. But that's a very complex situation. So basically, to have a successful densification strategy, the better is to have a population growth. So the question is, how does Polish cities planning face sustainability challenges? So this is what we are doing in Norway, and I would like to know more what is happening in Polish cities. Thank you for your attention.